My name is Joe Amditis. I work at Montclair State University. I work for the Center for Cooperative Media. It's part of the School of Communication and Media, and I'm here today to have a little fun with you guys, although some of these topics are pretty dense, but we're going to talk about media bias and media literacy. And I'm sure you already know, based on your questions, great questions. A lot of them really good questions. Some of them really funny. Did anybody in here ask the Brian Williams question? You did? Nice. All right, so we'll get into him later. Actually, we'll just get him right. He said he was somewhere where he wasn't and claimed that he got hit by a rocket in a helicopter. And then the story changed over the years. And basically, he just got caught exaggerating the truth, and now he's a disgraced former anchor. But not a big. That's not so much a case of bias as it is a case of like delusion in a lot of ways. So that I loved that question, by the way. It was funny. I thought it was great. So I want to hit that now. Anyway, so I went to Lakeland Regional High School up in Wanacue, down the street from you guys, basically. I lived in Ringwood for a lot of my life. I moved down to North Carolina for 12 years and lived down in the South. If you call that South, it is, trust me. A lot different from here. Also, spent a little time in Georgia, spent some time in Texas. Joined the military in high school, deployed to Iraq for a year in 2008 to 2009. Came back, went to Rutgers University, studied political science, criminal justice, psychology, and criminology. Worked for an international attorney who was Nelson Mandela's attorney for 2 years, which was, you guys know who Nelson Mandela is, right? You guys what, 14, 15? Nice, okay, cool. All right, yeah, so then after that, I started a newspaper, an online newspaper at Rutgers, and got picked up by Montclair State. After they saw the paper, they gave us a grant. I started working with them. When the paper kind of fell apart, when everybody graduated, it was all students. We weren't able to kind of pass the torch, and so I ended up getting a job with Montclair State. Here I am now. So I'm talking about media bias and literacy today. Literacy meaning the ability to read and understand what you're reading and comprehend what you're seeing in the news, what the stuff you're consuming, and bias being the implicit and often unrecognized tendencies to not necessarily manipulate the information, but represent the information that you give based on certain prejudices and understandings you have in your head, right? So it's a tilt based on who you are and what you represent and what interests you represent. So this isn't necessarily a case of media bias, but it's very interesting, I thought, and often and actually really funny example of how the media and the structure of mass media uses to send messages out far and wide, right? And how that even the subtlest differences
In consumer news, economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year. Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year. Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
Economic factors may take some spring out of the Easter Bunny step this year.
So you get the picture, right? You see what I'm saying, right? So this isn't in and of itself. Each one of those anchors or those reporters aren't necessarily expressing their own personal biases, but it's very obvious that line and assuming the entire rest of the script, that's what's called syndication. Okay, this is actually more of an aspect of convenience when it comes to producing news on a massive scale like that. Nobody wants to sit down in 80 different newsrooms and write some different variation of basically the same information. So they send the script out from central headquarters, right? That's not, the people who are reporting that script aren't necessarily exercising their own biases, but it's very obvious when we think about that information coming from a single source that if that source has any biases, then that script is going to be laden with biases, right? And so then when those people read that, of course they're not thinking about what they're saying other than trying to make sure that the words sound good when they come out. That bias is then translated and transmitted through these reporters, which is why it's very important for reporters to be aware of what they're saying, right? So it's just a very basic example of how a top-down mass media infrastructure serves to promote the single interests or at least the single messages of a source at the top of the pyramid, right? The 6 stations, the 6 news organizations like Gannett, Advanced Media, NBC, CBS. There's like 6 of them. that control and own almost every media outlet, especially the major ones in the country. And that's what's called media consolidation. And when that media consolidation happens, it stands to reason that the people at the top, at the consolidated areas, have certain interests that they pursue. It's not like they get in a room together and decide, this is the message. Actually, it is. That's exactly what they do. They're called board meetings, where people of power get into the same room and they decide the messages and decide the directions of, say, a company or of a newspaper. But it's not necessarily that they're sitting there and saying, let's screw over all these people. Let's not talk about poverty and let's not talk about inequality because that'll hurt us and we're rich, like we don't want to. No, but it's not too far-fetched to assume or to deduce that people will pursue their own interests, and people similarly situated at top level or at bottom level will by nature pursue common interests, right? So if I'm powerful and my buddies are powerful, we got to be powerful by a certain method, and we're going to continue doing that method to maintain our power. We're not going to even think about it. It's just nature. That's what's going to happen, right? And so this happens at the highest levels of everything from Volkswagen to MSNBC to Fox News to the editor-in-chief of the Daily Targum at Rutgers, the local, the student newspaper there. It happens everywhere. Everyone has an interest in preserving their interests, right? So they're going to do that. So, all right, so that kind of lays the basis for why people act the way they do. They act in their own interests, right? And that kind of establishes a natural equilibrium amongst people of similar areas and interests to pursue the same things and to maintain what we call the status quo, which means the way things are. The way things are now, the current structure, status quo, right? You hear that all the time, right? The status quo. We want to preserve the status quo, or don't mess with the status quo. Don't mess with the equilibrium. Everything's chill the way it is, and it's good. It's going to stay that way, right? That's basically what the implication is. Media bias serves those interests in a lot of ways. Again, not always intentional, more institutional, right? It happens because of the way the system is set up more often than people consciously saying, unless you're Roger Ailes or somebody at the top there, you're not consciously sending out memos and saying, oh, don't use this word because we don't want them to think, use entitlement instead of, or use handouts instead of entitlements or something along those lines, right? There are instances where that happens. There are a lot of instances where that happens, and they're deplorable, and they should be, light should be shown on them. And that's part of the role of watchdog journalism, and then meta-watchdog journalism, which watches journalism and critiques journalism, right? Bias is not punishable. It's a First Amendment protection. You're allowed to be as biased as you want. I'm pretty damn biased towards me. I think I'm pretty cool. Like, a lot of people don't think that. I think I'm pretty cool. I'm sure everyone you think you're pretty cool. I hope you do. I mean, you should, right? Because I'm sure you are. In some ways, I'm cool. In other ways, I'm not. But I'm biased towards me. And that's how it is because I am me. I come from certain perspectives and certain backgrounds, so I'm biased towards those perspectives. I am a white, heterosexual, Christian-raised male in the northeast of the United States, in the most densely populated, socially liberal, and wealthiest as a whole area in the world, especially in the country, right? New Jersey, New York metropolitan area, we got it good over here, right? This is like center of the world. We don't even think about Ohio. Nobody thinks about Nebraska or anything. They think about us, maybe. That's just where we're at, right? And so that comes with it. With that comes a certain bias towards the issues that I'm affected by. I am influenced by the media messages that go around within the circles that I hang out with, right? I can't, in good conscience, represent the perspective of a person of color. I can't do it because I can empathize and I can listen to what they say and I can try to understand and then help them get their voices heard. And that's what a big part of solutions-based journalism is focused on, right? The idea of trying to do journalism to make a change. But there are still biases implicit in that. So biases are not inherently good or bad. They are simply a utility and a reality of the current situation. So they exist. For better or for worse, they can be used for good or for evil, however you want to say that. That's a biased, determination in and of itself. I may think some things are evil. You may think that they're great, that they're the best of the bee's knees, right? That's an entirely subjective determination, right? So you can't necessarily say, and a couple of you asked this, a lot of you asked if biases were punishable, and the answer is no. A lot more of you actually asked if it was good or bad, and the answer is neither. It is what it is, essentially. Biases exist, and we have to learn to recognize them, and on an ad hoc basis, based on a one-on-one, case-by-case basis, we say, what are the biases inherent in this? does this person have, or does this journalist, or does this paper have an interest in promoting a certain narrative? If I am reading the International Business Times, or the financial press, any of the financial papers, it's safe to assume, but it's always, good to make sure and double check, but it's safe to assume that they have at least some bias towards the business community and the establishment and maintenance of that culture of business community. They only exist as long as there is a business community to report on, right? It's kind of weird because there are a lot of industries like that only exist as long as the issue that they're trying to tackle exists. Rape whistles, for instance, that's an industry that you don't really think about much, right? Without rape, there'd be no company for rape whistles, right? This is kind of messed up. The same thing applies to other industries in the media who serve to cover, for instance, corruption, right? They have an interest in covering corruption. So not all watchdog journalists are, completely free of bias. None of them are, in fact. Again, bias goes either way. It's implicit in what you do. It's implicit in who you are, and it affects how you view, how you perceive the world, and how you report on it, right? Let's see. Some common bias topics. Let me just go over that. Bias, good or bad. There are consequences for bias, okay? Whether they be, despite the fact that biases are neither good nor bad, they do have an effect on the world, and some of them are good. Sometimes the bias of the media allows social progress to occur, and it lifts people out of poverty because of new policies that go in. They get bridges built because there's political pressure or media pressure on the town council to, fix the roads or something. There are a lot of good effects that can happen when media takes a certain issue into their head. There are other more catastrophic effects on things like the global climate, for instance. The debate in the United States, and this is an example where the fabled objectivity of the media. How many people have heard, oh, well, the media is supposed to be objective? Well, Fox is partisan, MSNBC is on the left partisan, but CNN is more objective, right? They take both sides of the issue. They try to present both perspectives, right? And that's a fair thing. That dates back to an old law about fair use and equal time on the radio waves and the airwaves. They wanted to make sure that the people didn't just, bogart the whole airwaves and push other smaller voices out. It was a very noble attempt to even the playing field, but it has backfire. It does backfire, and the concept of objectivity comes into play when you have the bad parts of objectivity come into play when you have two issues that aren't necessarily equally represented, two viewpoints that are not equally represented, and this is where global climate change comes into play, right? Global climate change is a fact of nature, essentially, at this point. It is happening, and I'm pretty sure in the United States that's pretty much agreed upon. We all agree that global climate change is occurring. The dispute, at least in the United States, the rest of the industrialized world is not having this debate anymore. It long since agreed on one side of it. The debate still going on in the United States, largely because of the media, is whether or not humans caused climate change, right? So did our activities since the Industrial Revolution contribute to climate change, right? That's the big question. It's still hotly debated. They bring somebody on, and they bring somebody else on from the other side, and they go at it, and they say, well, it can't be us. The Earth fluctuates, it goes up and down. Look at the Ice Age, blah, 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 blah. It goes back and forth. And it makes it a very compelling television entertainment. It's very entertaining, right? Crossfire used to be, Crossfire was this, you just argue with each other. People love it. It's like reality TV. They don't actually care about what's being said. But another effect of that is that you have, on the one hand, the scientific community overwhelmingly, 97% of scientists around the world agree not only that climate change is happening, but agree that it is man-made, or at least driven largely by human activity with regard to polluting with carbon dioxide into the air. The greenhouse effect, it changes the temperature, rises the global temperature, changes the weather patterns, blah, blah, blah. Right, 97%. That's 97% on anything you pretty much, you go. That's a dead ringer right there. You're good. Now, instead of bringing 97 scientists or 97 people on stage who believe climate change is man-made or human-driven, and 3 people who disagree, they have a situation. Most debate shows or political commentary have one person who is a skeptic, they call him, a person who's a skeptic, and one person who is a scientist or an advocate or somebody who agrees with 97% of the scientific community. Right there, implicit in that entire setup, the structure of that posits 50%, 50%, right? That is now you're bringing the fringe 3% up against on an even level with the arguments of the 97%, right? Now we don't want to, hide away, unpopular viewpoints. That's not something. We're not trying to say that just because 97%, universal truth is not measured in mass appeal.